Hey Mustangs, in this video we're going to be taking a look at the basics of what you're going to need to know in order to understand biochemistry. Now, biochemistry can be a difficult unit, but it doesn't have to be. The reason why many students have difficulty with this unit is the sheer amount of vocabulary that's involved in biochemistry. Now, if you start with the basics and you build from there, it simplifies it, and that's our goal. That's what we're going to do in this video, and that's what we're going to be doing in class. So, first things first, the big ideas that you want to focus on as we learn about biochemistry are structure and function. How is something built? How is it put together? What is its composition? And also, how does that affect what it does or what it can do? So structure and function. How does structure affect function and what it can do? Starting with the basics, of course, is going to be atoms. We know that atoms are the basic building blocks of all things. So with atoms, they themselves have very specific structures that are involved with their functions. If you take a look at the periodic table of elements, each element has its own unique structure in the composition of protons, neutrons, and electrons. We know that helium, for example, has 1 proton, 1 electron. If you look at carbon, we know 6 protons, 6 electrons. All of that is involved in its structure, what it's composed of, and that affects its properties and its functions. You know, going from 5 protons to 6 protons changes the element right there. Or even adding protons, taking away, you're going to change the element, you're going to change the properties, change the function. So even starting with the most basic units, the most basic building blocks, function and structure are very strongly connected together there. Now, we can take atoms, of course, we know, and put them together to build living things. Now, when you're taking a look at living things, if you were to tear apart a living thing and divide it out into its atoms, we would find that 96% of living things are composed of only 4 atoms. Those 4 atoms are carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen. That is what most of a living thing is made out of in terms of atoms, so when you're talking about the number of atoms in each thing. Now, phosphorus and sulfur are also 2 atoms that come into play, and of course there's other atoms that are going to be involved as well, but these are the major players, the major ones that are involved in the building of living things. If you take atoms and you connect them together, so you form chemical bonds between atoms, you form molecules. Now with molecules, same thing. What you put together, how you build it, how its structure is going to affect function. One of the most important molecules out there is carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is the major source of carbon for all living things. So carbon dioxide is a very simple molecule, 1 carbon, 2 oxygen atoms, but it's very, very important because that is where living things get their carbon from. That is the source of carbon for living things. Another important molecule is going to be water. In that case, you have H2O. You have 1 oxygen connected to 2 hydrogen atoms. Again, a very simple molecule, but very, very important and essential for life. And you can see the structure is going to be different from, say, carbon dioxide. Here, this one, we also have a molecule much more complex than carbon dioxide or water, which only had 3 atoms as part of it. Here we have a molecule that has 24 atoms that build it. And when you're taking a look at the structure here, we can see that it's primarily made of carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen. In fact, even in these corners here, so here, 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 and here, we don't see a C for carbon, but carbon is actually in each of those corners as well. So if you take different atoms, put them together, you're going to build these molecules, and what you put together, the structure, is going to affect function, what it does. Now, our big focus is going to be macromolecules. Now, if you look at the prefix macro, macro means big, as opposed to micro, which means small. So micro, small, macro, big. We're looking at really big molecules. Now, the thing that is very special about macromolecules is going to be the fact that these macromolecules are made by connecting smaller, similar molecules together. So if you connect these small, similar molecules together, you can actually get a very big molecule from it. Now, there are 4 major macromolecules that we will be taking a look at. We will be looking at proteins, nucleic acids, carbohydrates, and lipids. Now lipids technically aren't a macromolecule, but we're going to throw them in there and study. They do have repeat units and stuff like that, but they don't get nearly as large as some of the macromolecules that we will be taking a look at. So with macromolecules, there's actually going to be two huge, very important vocabulary words that you need to understand. The first is monomer. So a monomer is a single unit, a single piece. So here, that would be a monomer, one single piece. Now we have 4 monomers, 4 individual pieces. Notice that they are similar but not identical, of course with the exception of these 2 red ones here. But looking at these 3, they are similar to each other, but they are not identical because they're not the same color. Okay, so that's what monomers are. They are single individual pieces that are similar. They could sometimes be identical, but we say similar units. Okay. Now, when we're looking at macromolecules, we are going to see that this here is an example of a monomer for a macromolecule. So this is analogous to this. So here's a single unit, one single piece. This is a monomer specifically for a carbohydrate. So that's one monomer, like this, for a carbohydrate. For nucleic acid, this whole thing is one monomer. Now looking at it, you're like, that looks like a whole bunch of different pieces all put together. But that is considered, all of those pieces together is one single unit, one monomer. And we could connect other similar units like this together in order to build a nucleic acid. This here, this is the monomer for a protein. Okay, so we could connect this to other similar monomers and we can actually build a protein from that. Now, another way that I like to focus on monomers and help students understand it is to look at chains. Chains are really good at helping us understand macromolecules. So if I take a look at this chain here, in looking at this chain, it's made of many smaller pieces connected together. One individual piece would be considered a monomer. So one of these by himself would be considered a monomer. And in a chain, we call one single piece a link. So one link by itself, like the piece in between my finger, one by itself would be considered a monomer, one single individual piece. The second important vocabulary word to understand is polymer. So polymer, if you look at the prefix poly, that means many. If you look at the prefix of monomer, mono actually means one. So that's one way that you can help yourself to remember that. Here, polymer, poly means many. So a polymer is covalently bonding many monomers together. So here, if that one single piece, that is my monomer, now I have 2, now I have 3. If I connect them together, I am building a polymer. So really simple. One single piece is a monomer, many monomers connect together, and now you have a polymer. So here, at our little kind of like Lego block example here, we have 3 monomers. We connect them together, now we have a polymer of 3. Connect more monomers together, we have a polymer of 5. Now the really cool thing about monomers and connecting them together to build polymers, these similar single units connecting together, we can build very simple things as far as structure goes, or we can build very complex things, just like we see here in this image. So you can actually get really complex for how you put those monomers together in different ways to actually build structures and that actually have a function. The last thing that we need to talk about before we get into class is going to be chemical reactions. So kind of refresh your memory here on chemical reactions. Now, a chemical reaction is the breaking apart of chemical bonds and the forming of new chemical bonds. And what we learn in chemistry is you start with reactants. Reactants are the molecules that you're starting with. The arrow tells us that bonds are going to be broken and that new bonds are going to be formed. And then you have the products, so the molecules that are made at the end. So we're going to take a look at a simple chemical reaction here. So here we have methane, here, so CH4, we have methane, 2 oxygen molecules, so O2, that's 2 oxygen molecules connected together, and the prefix here, remember, is telling us that we have 2 of those, so 2 oxygen molecules that we're going to be involved as our reactants in our chemical reaction. The arrow is telling us that the methane and the oxygen molecules are going to be torn apart, so the chemical bonds are going to be broken and rearranged. We're going to form new bonds, And in this case, by tearing apart the methane and the oxygen molecules, we're going to make carbon dioxide and 2 water molecules. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. So we have 1 carbon connected to 4 hydrogens, that's our methane, and we have 2 oxygen molecules. Chemical reaction is going to occur. We're going to break apart the chemical bonds in methane and the oxygen molecules, and we're going to rearrange those atoms into our products, which are carbon dioxide and water. So go like this, and there you go. Okay, so that's all a chemical reaction is: breaking chemical bonds, rearranging, and forming new chemical bonds. Now, later in the year, coming up pretty soon, we're actually going to be taking a look at this chemical reaction here. So if you take a close look, 6 carbon dioxide molecules, 6 water molecules, going to get us glucose and oxygen. So if you think about it, you learned this way back in 9th grade, this of course is photosynthesis. So this is a chemical reaction that we're going to take a close look at later in the year. Now, as far as macromolecules go, there are 2 major chemical reactions that you need to understand with macromolecules. The first is dehydration synthesis. Dehydration synthesis is super important because this is how macromolecules are formed. In order to connect monomers together, you have to covalently bond them together, and that's what dehydration synthesis is all about. In this chemical reaction, you're going to take 2 monomers, you're going to take hydrogen from one, a hydroxyl group, which is OH, from another. Those 2 come together, OH and H, that forms water, and the monomers are going to be able to covalently bond together. So if we take a look at this image here, okay, we take a look here, we have a monomer here, a monomer there, and in this case we're actually looking at monomers for carbohydrates. So here's one monomer, here's another. We want to covalently bond them together here. In order to do that, we're going to take the OH, the hydroxyl group from here, we're going to take a hydrogen from here, those come together to form water, and when we do that, we get a covalent bond between our monomers. Now, this does involve enzymes, and I know it doesn't show it here in this picture, but just about every single chemical reaction you can think of that takes place in a living thing usually involves an enzyme. We're just not showing it in this case. The last chemical reaction here that you need to know is going to be hydrolysis. Now, hydrolysis is the exact opposite of dehydration synthesis. So where dehydration synthesis was all about building the macromolecules by connecting the monomers together, here in hydrolysis, this is breaking those monomers apart. So hydrolysis does the exact opposite in this case. In order to do that, using an enzyme and adding water, we are going to break apart monomers. So if we take a look here, down here, here's one monomer, here's another monomer. They are covalently bonded together. We add water and an enzyme. That's going to break apart the bonds. The water is going to split, and an OH, a hydroxyl group, will go here, and hydrogen will go here. And there we have broken apart our monomers, and we have broken apart into individual pieces. So from here, when we get into class, what we're going to be doing is taking a closer look at the details of macromolecules.